My family turned my celebration into my brother's spotlight. So I stepped up and spoke the truth. The salt-laced breeze swept through Morro Bay, carrying the faint clatter of dishes from the Carver family's seafood restaurant, the Salty Anchor. I was 16, perched on a stool in the corner of the bustling dining room, scribbling in my notebook. The place was alive, waiters weaving between tables, the hum of conversation blending with the sizzle of grilled cod. My parents, Paul and Diane Carver, stood at the helm, greeting guests with practiced smiles. To the town, we were the picture of success. A family-run gem on California's coast, serving crab cakes and clam chowder to tourists and locals alike. But to me, Elise Carver, the restaurant, was a stage where I was always miscast. I wasn't like my younger brother, Leo, who, at 14, could charm a table of regulars and julienne carrots faster than our head chef. Leo was the golden child, the one my parents saw as the future of the Salty Anchor. "He's got the knack," Dad would say, ruffling Leo's hair as he handed him a spatula. Mom would nod, her eyes gleaming with pride. "He'll take this place to new heights." Me? I was the dreamer, the one who'd rather plan a beachside festival than debone a fish. My notebook was filled with sketches of event layouts, guest lists, and lighting ideas, things my parents dismissed as hobbies, not a legacy. That summer, I'd begged to organize a small anniversary event for the restaurant's 20th year. I envisioned string lights over the patio, a local band playing soft jazz, and a menu that told the story of Morro Bay. I spent weeks planning, even pitching it to Mom one evening as she balanced the books. "Elise, we don't need frills," she said, barely looking up. "People come for the food, not your decorations." Dad overheard and chuckled. "Let Leo handle the specials that night. He's got ideas for a new lobster dish." I swallowed my disappointment, nodding as if it didn't sting. Leo, oblivious, grinned and started rattling off recipe ideas. I closed my notebook. The anniversary came and went, a success by all accounts, but it wasn't mine. Leo's lobster dish sold out, and Mom hung a photo of him in the kitchen, beaming beside the chef. I helped bus tables, my ideas left on the pages of my notebook, gathering dust. That night, as I lay in my room overlooking the bay, the moonlight glinting off the water, I felt like a ghost in my own home. Present, but unseen. It wasn't just the restaurant. At home, my parents' attention orbited Leo. They enrolled him in a culinary camp, bought him a set of engraved knives, and turned the spare room into a space for his recipe experiments. My space was the attic, a cramped nook with a slanted ceiling where I kept my books and sketches. "Elise, you're practical," Dad said once, as if it were a compliment. "You'll figure out your place." But I didn't want to figure out a place in their vision. I wanted to create my own. The quiet disappointment settled like sand in my chest. I loved my family, but I was starting to see the truth. In their eyes, I was the supporting act, not the star. As the waves crashed outside my window, I made a silent promise to myself. I'd find a stage where my dreams weren't just hobbies, where I could shine as Elise, not as Leo's shadow. The fog rolled in over Morro Bay, cloaking the harbor in a soft gray veil. I was 17, standing in the attic of our family home, my sanctuary of mismatched furniture and scattered notebooks. The slanted ceiling bore the weight of my dreams, sketches of festival stages pinned to the walls, timelines for the community events tucked into folders. Downstairs, the clink of dishes and Leo's laughter filled the air as he tested a new sauce for the Salty Anchor. My parents' voices followed, praising his natural talent. I tried to focus on my latest idea, a summer market showcasing local artisans, but the sound of their pride in him seeped through the floorboards, a reminder of my place. That spring, I'd carved out a corner of the restaurant's office to plan events, a small desk wedged between file cabinets. I'd spent weeks organizing a charity dinner, securing a local winery to donate bottles and a musician to play for free. When I showed Mom the plan, her eyes skimmed the page. "Looks fine, Elise, but Leo's launching a new menu that week. We can't split focus." Dad patted my shoulder. "Help with the front of house, okay? That's where we need you." I nodded, shoving the plan into a drawer. The dinner never happened. Then came the day I lost my space entirely. I came home from school to find my desk gone from the office, replaced by a sleek stainless steel counter for Leo's recipe tastings. My folders were stacked haphazardly in a box by the door. Leo needs room to innovate, Mom said, not meeting my eyes. You can work at the kitchen table. I stood there, heart sinking, as Leo breezed in, oblivious, carrying a tray of seared scallops. Smell this, Elise, it's going to be a hit. I forced a smile, but inside I was unraveling. The restaurant, the house, it was all becoming Leo's stage. That evening, I retreated to the attic where Aunt Margaret found me. She was Mom's older sister, a free spirit who ran a bookstore in San Luis Obispo and always seemed to see me when no one else did. They're wrong to push you out, she said, sitting cross-legged on the floor. Your ideas are big, Elise. Don't let them shrink you. She handed me a college brochure for a communications program at UC Santa Barbara. This could be your ticket out. You're more than a sidekick. Her words lit a spark. I spent nights poring over the brochure, imagining a world where my plans weren't dismissed. By summer, I applied to UC Santa Barbara in secret, using money from my part-time job at a coffee shop to cover the application fee. When the acceptance letter arrived, I showed Aunt Margaret first. Her grin was wider than the bay. You're going to shine, kid. Telling my parents was harder. At dinner, I slid the letter across the table. Mom's fork paused midair. College? Elise, we thought you'd stay and help with the restaurant. Dad frowned. Leo's got the vision, but we need you to keep things running. I gripped my napkin. I want to study event planning. It's what I'm good at. Silence stretched. Finally, Mom sighed. If you must, but don't expect us to pay for it. Aunt Margaret stepped in later, promising to cover what my scholarships didn't. As I packed for Santa Barbara, the attic felt less like a cage and more like a launch pad. I was ready to claim my own space. The Santa Barbara sun spilled across the UC campus, painting the bike paths gold. I was 20, a sophomore in the communications program, juggling classes, a part-time job at a local event planning firm, and a dream that felt closer every day. My attic days in Morro Bay were a distant ache, replaced by late nights sketching festival layouts and brainstorming digital platforms for event vendors. The salty anchor, my parents, Leo, they were still there, 40 miles up the coast, but I was building something new. I wasn't just Elise, Leo's sister. I was Elise Carver, someone with a voice. My first big break came during a class project. We were tasked with designing a community event, and I pitched a coastal arts festival, live music, food trucks, and pop-up galleries for local artists. My professor, Dr. Nguyen, called it visionary and connected me with a Santa Barbara events company, Coastal Pulse. They hired me as an intern, and soon I was coordinating logistics for weddings and corporate retreats. I learned to negotiate with vendors, troubleshoot last-minute cancellations, and read a client's unspoken needs. Every successful event felt like proof I wasn't the practical sidekick my parents saw. In my junior year, I started tinkering with an idea, a digital platform to connect event planners with suppliers, caterers, florists, musicians in one streamlined hub. I called it Event Link. Nights in my dorm became marathons of coding tutorials and mock-ups, fueled by coffee and ambition. Aunt Margaret, my biggest cheerleader, sent me books on entrepreneurship and called weekly to hear updates. You're building a legacy, Elise, she'd say. My parents, though, barely asked about school. When I visited Morro Bay for Thanksgiving, Mom mentioned Leo's new tasting menu before I could share my internship news. Dad nodded absently, focused on a supplier issue at the restaurant. I left early, telling myself it didn't matter. By senior year, EventLink was more than a concept. I'd built a prototype and pitched it at a university startup competition, winning second place and a $5,000 grant. Coastal Pulse took notice and offered me a full-time role after graduation, with freedom to develop EventLink on the side. I graduated with honors, my name printed in the program next to Summa Cum Laude. Aunt Margaret was there, cheering louder than anyone. My parents sent a text. Proud of you. Busy at the restaurant. Sorry we couldn't make it. Meanwhile, the salty anchor was faltering. Leo, now 20, had taken over daily operations, but his ambition outpaced his skill. Yelp reviews mentioned inconsistent dishes and slow service. Mom called once, her voice tight. Leo's struggling, Elise. Maybe you could come back and help. I hesitated, then said, I have my own path now. It was the first time I'd refused them outright. Hanging up, I felt a pang, but also a strange lightness. That summer, EventLink caught the eye of a San Francisco tech firm, Nexus Events. They invited me to pitch at their headquarters, a glass-walled office overlooking the bay. I walked in, heart pounding, and presented my platform to a panel of executives. This could disrupt the industry, one said, scribbling notes. 2 weeks later, they offered to acquire EventLink for $200,000 and hire me as a product manager. I signed the deal, hands trembling. As I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, the Pacific stretching before me, I realized I wasn't rising to prove my parents wrong. I was rising for myself. The Morro Bay sunset cast a warm glow over the salty Anchor, its patio strung with fairy lights for the restaurant's 30th anniversary. I was 24, standing at the edge of the crowd, a glass of sparkling cider in hand. The air carried the scent of grilled shrimp and salt, mingling with laughter from guests, locals, suppliers, and a few relatives, including Aunt Margaret. I'd poured $10,000 of my savings into this event, a gesture to honor the family legacy and maybe bridge the gap with my parents. I'd trusted Mom to handle the details, sending her funds for catering, decor, and a jazz trio. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of the restaurant, and quietly of me, the daughter who'd made it on her own. The tables were draped in navy linens, centerpieces bursting with sea glass and succulents. I'd planned every detail in my head, even if Mom insisted on executing it. But as I scanned the patio, something felt off. A banner hung above the bar, reading, "Leo's Coastal Kitchen, a New Era." My stomach twisted. Leo, now 22, strutted through the crowd in a crisp chef's coat, shaking hands like a politician. Mom beamed beside him, guiding guests to a display of his new signature dishes. Dad was at the grill, boasting about Leo's visionary rebrand. My name wasn't mentioned once. I found Aunt Margaret by the dessert table, her eyes narrowing as she saw the banner. "They didn't tell you, did they?" she asked. I shook my head, the realization sinking in. This wasn't our celebration. It was Leo's stage, funded by my money. I gripped my glass, torn between walking away and confronting the lie. Then Mom took the microphone, her voice bright. "Thank you all for joining us to celebrate 30 years of the Salty Anchor and the launch of Leo's Coastal Kitchen, the future of our family legacy." Applause erupted. Leo stepped forward, grinning, and began pitching his new menu. I stood frozen, invisible in my own event. Enough was enough. I stepped onto the patio's small stage, heart pounding but steady. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through the chatter. The crowd hushed, eyes turning to me. Mom's smile faltered. Leo paused, confused. "I'm Elise Carver, Paul and Diane's daughter. I funded this event to honor our family's restaurant." Murmurs rippled through the guests. But I didn't know it would be turned into a launch for Leo's brand. That's not what I paid for. I took a breath, meeting Mom's wide eyes. I also need to share something else. When the restaurant was on the brink of bankruptcy last year, I connected Dad with an investor who saved it. I didn't ask for credit then, but I won't let my contribution be erased tonight. The patio fell silent. Leo's face flushed, his chef's coat suddenly too big for him. "Elise, I didn't know," he stammered, glancing at Mom. Dad stepped forward, jaw tight. "This isn't the time, Elise." But Aunt Margaret stood, her voice firm. "It's exactly the time." A guest, a local supplier, nodded. "She's right. Let her speak." Mom's hands trembled as she gripped the microphone stand. Then Leo spoke, softer now. "I messed up. I should have asked about the money." His admission hung in the air, fragile but real. Mom opened her mouth to protest, but the crowd's gaze held her back. For the first time, I wasn't the shadow. I was the one they saw. The San Francisco skyline glittered beyond my office window, a constellation of lights reflecting my new reality. At 27, I was CEO of Nexus Events, the company that had acquired EventLink 3 years ago. The platform had grown into a global network, connecting thousands of event planners with vendors across continents. My days were filled with strategy meetings, pitches to investors, and mentoring a team that believed in my vision. Morro Bay, the Salty Anchor, and the family I'd left behind felt like a distant chapter, one I'd closed after that fateful anniversary night. But some ties, I learned, don't sever so easily. The salty anchor had limped along since the anniversary. Leo's rebrand flopped. Customers missed the old charm, and his inexperience showed in mounting debts. Mom called once, her voice brittle, asking if I'd consult on a new menu. "You're good at organizing," she said, as if that was all I'd done. I declined politely, focusing instead on my own path. Dad never reached out. But Leo did, a year after the event, texting, "I'm sorry about the party. Can we talk?" I met him at a cafe in Santa Barbara, where he admitted he'd leaned too hard on our parents' praise. "I'm trying to fix the restaurant," he said, eyes earnest. "Can you help?" I hesitated, then offered to connect him with a consultant I trusted. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but a step toward something new. Aunt Margaret remained my anchor. Every Sunday, I drove to her bookstore in San Luis Obispo, where we'd sip tea and flip through old photos. She'd frame my achievements, articles about EventLink, my CEO announcement, with the pride my parents never showed. "You didn't just rise, Elise," she said once. "You built a legacy that's yours." Her words grounded me, reminding me why I'd fought so hard. My friends, too, became my chosen family, colleagues who celebrated my wins, roommates who'd stayed up late brainstorming with me. They saw me, not as Leo's sister, but as Elise. One spring evening, as I left Nexus after signing a deal to expand EventLink into Europe, I got a call from Leo. "The restaurant's turning around," he said, voice lighter than I'd ever heard. "Your consultant helped. I'm learning, Elise, not just cooking, managing, listening." He paused. "I want you to see it. No pressure." I visited Morro Bay the next weekend, stepping into the salty anchor for the first time in years. The patio was simpler now. The fairy lights gone, but the tables were full. Leo greeted me, apron smudged, and showed me a menu blending his dishes with the classics. "I kept your idea," he said, pointing to a small event space in the back. "For local bands, like you wanted." I smiled, surprised by the warmth I felt. As I drove back to Aunt Margaret's that night, the coastal road stretching dark and quiet, I realized I'd found peace. Not because Leo had changed or because the restaurant was healing, but because I'd chosen myself. My legacy wasn't tied to the salty anchor or my parents' approval. It was in the platform I'd built, the team I led, the life I'd crafted. I pulled over, the ocean whispering below, and called Aunt Margaret. "I did it," I said, voice steady. She laughed softly. "You always have, Elise, from day one.